Hello, welcome back to our discussions of JavaScript. This time we're going to look at the array methods, Splice and Slice. So starting with the well-named Splice method, which can remove or insert elements in an array. So if you think about splicing a wire, you are either removing a segment of wire or adding to it. So Splice does the same thing except to erase. So we set up the array. It's an array of strings. I study JavaScript. And then we log it. So that's our first log of it. I studied JavaScript, 3 elements in the array. So our first example of Splice. So index is the only required parameter. So this call will remove all elements at the index and afterwards. So Splice starting at index 1, and we see starting at index 1, all the elements are removed from the array, leaving just one element left in the array. The example on line 16 is essentially the same, changing the index to 2. And notice that array 3, I study. So it starts at a later index, so it leaves one element left and removes the rest. Now we'll use a second parameter, which notice is the optional delete count. So at line 21, at index 1, we delete 1. So let's hit content array 4, and we have I JavaScript. So remove one element at index 1. So at 26, we see the first use of the ability of Splice to add elements to an array. Here, starting at index 2, remove one element and replace it with mountain climbing and cooking. And that's output at array 5. So we replace index at element 2, which is JavaScript, and then replace it with mountain and cooking. Now the example at line 31, which changes one parameter, the one that was here, says remove 0 here. So we see at line 32, array 6. And so I study mountain climbing, cooking, JavaScript. You can see that mountain climbing and cooking were inserted before JavaScript, but JavaScript was retained because we told it to remove 0 elements. You can specify a negative index. It's not taken literally because there's no such thing as a negative array index at a 0-based array. It's a special signal to the Splice method to say, I'm referring to the last element of the array. So remove 0, last element of the array. And so we see at array 7 how mountain climbing and cooking got inserted before JavaScript. Convenient if you don't know the exact length of the array in the moment. Line 41 modifies that example slightly by saying remove one element. So we see that array 8, I studied mountain climbing and cooking, and the last element in the array has been deleted. Now here I'm essentially specifying an invalid removal count at 20 because it's starting at the last element of the array and saying to remove 20 elements. I can't do that, but it treats it, it kind of ignores it and does the reasonable thing, which is a little refreshing. So the main call out here is that Splice returns another array with containing the removed elements. So that's what I print out here, remove 9 here. So JavaScript was removed. All right, so Splice useful for adding and removing elements. So Slice is useful for array copy, very common. So I set up the array again, I study JavaScript, and then do array.slice and copy the array. Notice that Slice has a start and an end parameter. Both are optional. So if you don't specify any parameters at all, it says to copy the entire array. And so we can see array copy 9, how the entire array was copied. This is very common in JavaScript to see the use of Slice in that manner. So the Slice example on line 61 says starting at index 1 and going up to index 2, it's not a count. It's going up to index 2 but not including index 2 copy. So essentially this says copy the element at index 1, and that's all because it's stopping at 2. So you can see that's printed out at 10, and that's the element at index 1. So example on line 64 is essentially the same answer as same example as 61, except it changes the index to 0. So we start copying it starting at 0 and going up to index 2. So the result, I study. So Slice for doing a copy of an array, because it has these two parameters, it can behave very flexibly in terms of what the array copy looks like, and Splice, which is used to splice the array, insert segments or delete segments, or both, insert and delete, which you could view as a replacement. So very useful array manipulation methods in JavaScript.